Okay, next up we have Chris Evans, the CEO of Winsome Resources. We had you on the podcast just after you made this Renard acquisition, and I was very privileged to join 15 others last Friday to actually see it. I don't want to give too much away from that, but I did take some footage there of the plant. We've got to kind of collate that and edit that, and that'll come out in a little while. But I think we saw you at PDAC. You had, and then after our visit, our last conversation, I think you were heading to Asia. You met with a lot of Asian strategics. There's a lot of Asian strategics here. If you could just update us on what's happening, at Winsome. The stock, obviously, it hit like a 50 low, earlier in the year. It popped to 145, I think, on the Renard news, and now it's, everything's down a lot, but I haven't looked on a relative basis. But as I was saying before, we're at Red Rock, and there's a lot of red rock on the RK Equity scoreboard. But well-capitalized companies. You also did a capital raise, so just give us an update, since we kind of last spoke to you, and I'll leave it with you.
Thank you, Howard. Pleasure to be here at the conference and to be interviewed. I think there's certainly been a lot happening in the last couple of months for us, despite the market conditions. I think that's a function, I was going to say luck, but perhaps compared to some of our peers, we're well capitalised, and that's allowed us to keep progressing with all our planned activities. So we've had a series of strategic conversations, as you alluded to. They started in earnest around PDAC this year, and that was on the back of our maiden resource being published at the very end of last year. That excited a lot more interest. So we had a first round of discussions then. About 6 weeks ago we went to Korea and Japan, met in person a lot of the potential strategic partners that we might be dealing with, and now again at this conference. The nature of the strategic partnerships we are looking for is a partner who can help us convert our product into lithium hydroxide within Quebec. And as you alluded to, again, there are a lot of those here today. So we're looking forward to the conversations, and sort of packed out 16 meetings today and similar tomorrow, which is very encouraging. The other things we've done in the last couple of months is upgraded our resource. So about 6 weeks ago we published resource upgrade, and that's put us now as the third largest lithium resource in North America, but importantly I think the largest indicated resource, the largest lithium indicated resource in North America. And with the Renard mine just 60 kilometres away and the ability to acquire that at some point this year, that gives us a credible pathway to production with a world-class resource just down the road. And then just last week we announced our capital raise. We wanted to be well funded and remove any perception that we weren't well funded enough to exercise the option to acquire Renard and therefore be perceived as come raise. So we did a raise of 25 million Australian dollars. We've now got circa 50 in the bank, and that allows us again for the next 12 months or so to continue with all the activities we want to, while we finish our studies in early September, potentially exercise the option to acquire Renard, and then look for a strategic partner.
Okay, and one thing that people, I think, may not fully understand is that the flow-through funding is very attractive terms, but it needs to be spent on exploration, and it needs to be spent within 12 months, right? So you don't have a choice to just hold on to a lot of that capital, correct?
Yes. The specifics are that it has to be spent by the end of the following calendar year. So the flow-through we just raised now has to be spent by the end of next year. So we've effectively got 18 months to spend that. But that's right, we've still got
the money raised last year,
that's got to be spent by the end of this year.
Your spend might have been higher than if you, just in the market environment we're in, if people are holding back on spending, your level of spending, you had to drill from last year's capital raise.
That's exactly right. And we raised about 30 million in October last year, all flow through. So we had it in our cash flow projections that we would be spending all of that by the end of this year. Maybe the amount we spent has surprised some in the market, but it was always part of our plans.
Okay, and the Renard mine, you said you were going to come out with 2 scoping studies.
That's right. Scoping studies and PEA, they'll be both in JORC and NI 43-101 format. The reason there's two. One is a greenfield project just on Adina, as if we were building a new plant, no Renard diamond mine. And then the other study will be a brownfield project, repurposing the Renard mine to process our lithium. And those will compare the economics and the technical merits of those two projects or two studies, and after that make the decision as to whether we acquire the Renard mine. But there's nothing yet that we see that would say we wouldn't acquire that.
Okay, we visited it. I mean, this was built, not that long ago, so a lot of, all of the equipment is very new, and I'm not an expert on all the flow sheets, but I understood a large part of the front end, is similar. Some on the back end you would need to, purchase, but we'll know in your scoping study and PEA what the estimates are. But the overall idea of this is that you will save a meaningful amount, in the hundreds of millions of dollars in capex, and also because it was an already permitted mine, it should accelerate your permitting plan.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right. We expect to save significant capex, hundreds of millions of dollars. We've got to be careful about accelerating the plans. We try not to use that word. It's more about reducing the risk associated with our approvals.
Okay.
Because the majority of the infrastructure is already there, we effectively don't have to have that permitted. The permitting we do have to do, it's got a much smaller disturbance area. There's less approvals associated with it, and therefore the risk is less.
Mm-hmm. And you've emphasized that you're going to convert this in Quebec, so there's no option in your mind to sell spodumene either to China or maybe to Tesla at Corpus Christi?
That's certainly not our first intent. We're signalling very clearly to the Quebec government, and not only for social acceptability reasons, but just for logistical reasons, that we would like to have our product converted in Quebec. There's a gap in the supply chain as far as we can see. The Quebec government's done a fantastic job of attracting strategics, end users, GM, Ford, EcoPro and POSCO, BASF, Northvolt, all into Quebec. They're producing PCAM and CAM materials, but they need lithium from Quebec. So there's a gap in the supply chain that we think we can slot into. Okay.
While I was on the visit there, what came to mind, we had some involvement in Kidman, and then the news of SQM coming into Sweden, small investment, but they came into Kidman, and then Wesfarmers took over Kidman, and so that's two large companies, building integrated, mine and conversion. So I just started thinking, could SQM kind of come into Quebec if they're going to Sweden, not just playing around in Western Australia, and then who out there might be a Wesfarmers, an American or a Canadian industrial company that has the long-term vision, diversified conglomerate to partner, and this wasn't specific to Winsome, but it could be Winsome, it could be Patriot, it could be, and right now you have North American Lithium, trying to get to nameplate capacity, lower their cost. They're selling to China and eventually soon to Tesla, but it's still going to be a while before there's conversion. Arcadium, they're building an integrated, but so there's 11 or 12 aluminum smelters in Quebec, and I envision there to be 10 or 11 hydroxide and carbonate conversion facilities, but it's a lot of capital. I mean, those aluminum refineries started in World War II, and I don't know how many years it took to build that, but this is not necessarily for you to comment. There's just an observation that what really catalyzed, the vertically integrated hydroxide from spodumene in Western Australia was this SQM Wesfarmers, and might we see that? Do you have any sense, from the conversations you're having? I know you want to partner, on the downstream, but what's your sense of their view of Quebec and this comparable model to what you see in Western Australia?
I wouldn't say I've seen any chemical companies jump to mind or industrial companies like that, but it's no secret that the likes of Rio Tinto have been looking around Quebec. Of course, they're the owners of several of those aluminum smelters. So they could be that third party, someone like them. Maybe a slightly different context than what happened in Western Australia, but they could be the ones who put the deal together or complete that tripartite agreement that may be very synergistic to get projects like ours into production in Quebec.
Maybe some of the other players that are going downstream into cathode and battery manufacturing in the region. There's a POSCO, there's EcoPro, there's a BASF. Northvolt, so maybe some of those players. I was interested to be, there's lots of people here I've met around, but I hadn't seen like Fortescue in a while. I saw them a few years ago here.
Yes,
I saw them here, but they could be, doesn't necessarily have to be a American or Canadian industrial company. It could be another big Australian company. Like, why wouldn't Gina Reinhardt come here potentially? I mean, there's opportunity, but anyway, it's a function of the market is the market, and we'll see how that goes. Could you just comment lastly on Power Metals? Is a investment you made, and I've had an opportunity to meet Hayden Daxter here. Any update on that investment and the cesium opportunity? They've put out some interesting drill results on the cesium side.
Yeah, it's very encouraging. We originally acquired our 20% equity stake and all the offtake rights for the Case Lake project based on the lithium. But the cesium's become more interesting over the past 12 months. As far as I'm aware, there are currently, as of today, no operating cesium mines in the world. The two that were most recently operating were Bakita and Tanco in Manitoba, both owned by Sinomine. So cesium being a critical mineral both in the US and Canada is a hot topic. And we have all the offtake rights, and so we're having some interesting thoughts about what we can do with those without distracting ourselves from our main game, which is developing Adina and Renard. That's becoming a potentially strategically important, perhaps financially beneficial investment that we made.
Yeah, I don't think anybody who looks at your valuation puts any valuation, I guess, on your 20% ownership in Power Metals.
They don't, no. The equity value there is 12 million or something like that, and then who knows what the offtake's worth.
Right. Okay. But to be continued on that, this was just a quick kind of catch-up. We're going to have more, as I said, because I did visit. I need to kind of consolidate my thoughts and some of that footage, but really appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedule here at Fastmarkets to have this update with us, Chris.
Thank you, Howard, and thanks for coming to site last week.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.